Lila stood behind the reception desk, flicking through endless guest check-ins at the hotel lobby. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, and the fluorescent lights hummed softly over her as she struggled to focus. The revolving doors swished open, and in walked a man wearing an expensive suit that looked a little too tight. His shoes were polished to a shine, and a briefcase hung heavily from his wrist. She glanced up, barely meeting his gaze before returning to her work. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice dripping with impatience. Lila barely noticed him. She was used to businessman types rushing in and out, shouting and demanding favors. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked," she replied, not breaking her rhythm. "Come on now," he said, a sharp edge creeping into his tone. "It's just for one night." She looked at him, then glanced at the clock on the wall. A smattering of guests filled the lobby, but they were all settled in with their drinks, including the tired-looking group in the corner, whose laughter drowned out the man's voice. It didn't feel like the right moment to engage with someone so pushy. "I really can't, sir," she replied firmly, his face twisted in frustration. She met his eyes, steady and unwavering. This caught him off guard for a moment. He opened his mouth to respond, then shut it again, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Fine," he huffed, his irritation palpable. He turned on his heel and stormed toward the exit. Lila didn't follow him with her gaze. She had too many other things to focus on. Moments later, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, breaking the quiet tension in the lobby. The screen flashed a picture of the man who had just stomped out, looking smug and powerful, the very image of success. A chill crept down Lila's spine. She glanced around the lobby, noting that few people seemed to pay attention. But her focus remained locked on the TV as the news anchor spoke, recounting the details of the investigation. It was the kind of thing you see in movies, a person seemingly at the top of the world suddenly facing scandal, rumors swirling and accusations flying. As she listened, memories of their brief encounter flooded back. She felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. This man had strutted in, demanding the world, and had walked out with nothing but defeat. But now it was more than just that. He was still in turmoil. All the confidence he had shown moments before crumbled in the public eye. She wondered how many other people had treated him the same way, how many others might see him differently now. The broadcast continued, revealing that he was not just a business tycoon, but also a community leader, well respected just days earlier. Lila had heard his name whispered around the office: charities, donations, big promises. She felt a pang of empathy. She understood in a way how the fall from grace could feel. She had her own struggles too, an afterthought in a world that often overlooked those behind the scenes. A soft voice broke her reverie. Jenna, a fellow receptionist, stood beside her, eyes glued to the screen. "Yeah, it is," Lila said quietly, still thinking about the man. Jenna's eyes widened. "Seriously?" Lila nodded. "He wanted a room, but we're booked." Her chest felt tight, part of her felt guilty, even if it was only a fleeting thought. The news report continued, shifting to video clips of people outside the man's grand office, standing with signs protesting the alleged fraud. "They were at one of his fundraisers last week," Jenna said, shaking her head. She trailed off, her voice dropping into disbelief. "Now he's the villain," Lila finished. She felt a knot in her stomach, the weight of reality pressing down on her. Hours passed and the world turned. The lobby emptied and Lila checked the clock again, seeing it was almost closing time. She had thought about the man throughout her shift. Curiosity gnawed at her. Did he have a family, friends? What would they think now, watching their hero fall apart? Just then, the doors swung open again. Lila's heart skipped a beat. It was him. The man, looking worn and defeated, stood at the entrance, his sharp suit now wrinkled, his tie askew. He searched the lobby, frantic, perhaps hoping to find some semblance of solace. "Excuse me," he said. This time his voice carried a different weight, almost fragile. Lila glanced at her colleague, who seemed just as taken aback. Sure," she finally managed, hesitant. He walked over, almost dragging his feet. "I know you turned me away before," he said, his bold tone now replaced by vulnerability. "But I need a place to go." His eyes darted around the lobby as if expecting to find judgment lurking behind every corner. Lila's heart ached for him despite herself. "I'm sorry, but we're still fully booked." "I can pay," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his words. "Even if you had $1 million, it wouldn't change the fact that we don't have a room." He glanced back at the TV, still playing clips of him, of the protests, of the people who were so angry they were almost shaking with rage. "I'm not a bad person," he said, almost pleading. "Maybe," Lila replied, her voice steady. "But right now, you're facing the consequences of your actions." For the first time, she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, like a moment of clarity washing over him in the storm. Her voice was firm. The words sank in and she could see the struggle within him. Somewhere between the person he pretended to be and the person he really was, he had lost his way. The facade was cracking, and living in that spotlight must have felt suffocating. "Without my image," he mumbled, his bravado shattered. Lila allowed a moment of silence. "Sometimes you have to step back to find out who you really want to be. Maybe this is your chance," or... He looked at her, the weariness in his eyes plain as day. "You don't have to face it alone. People might surprise you." He blinked hard, as though holding back tears. She sighed softly, feeling the weight of this moment wrap around them both. As he turned to leave, he paused, his back to her. He said her name softly as if it'd wait, and just like that, he walked back into the world, the thick door closing behind him, the murmur of the TV fading into the background. Lila let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. In that quiet moment, she felt a sudden rush of clarity. Life wasn't just about what you portrayed on the outside. It was a messy, complicated tangle of choices and consequences. It was grappling with identity, humility, and sometimes the kindness of a stranger. The lobby was eerily quiet for a busy Friday evening, the kind of quiet that makes you acutely aware of every footstep and murmur. The tall glass windows reflected the bright city lights outside, while the sound of honking cars wafted in from the street. Mia stood at the reception desk, rechecking the guest list on the computer, when the large wooden doors swung wide open. A man walked in, his presence filling the room. He wore a designer suit that seemed tailored to fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. His hair was slicked back, giving him an air of authority, but it was his eyes, sharp and calculating, that caught Mia's attention. She could feel something off about him, an unsettling intensity that surrounded him like a dark cloud. He called out, his voice loud and commanding, "I need a seat." Mia glanced up, her stomach tightening as she met his piercing gaze. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're at full capacity this evening," she replied, trying to keep her tone professional. His face contorted into an expression of disbelief mingled with irritation. "I don't think you understand. I need a seat right now." She shook her head. "I really can't." The man leaned over the counter, invading her personal space. He asked, a sneer creeping into his voice. Mia folded her arms, wrestling with the sudden urge to push back. For a moment, thick silence hung in the air. It felt as if the world outside held its breath, waiting. His lips tightened in frustration, but he didn't say another word. With an exaggerated sigh, he spun on his heel and marched out, the doors slamming shut behind him. As the lobby returned to its usual murmur of chatter, Mia resumed her work, shaking off the encounter. A low buzz of conversation continued around her, but before she could fully dive back into her tasks, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, its bright colors cutting through the dimly lit lobby. The news anchor's voice echoed in the room, drawing the attention of several guests. As the camera cut to a polished logo with the man's face plastered across it, Mia's heart sank. It was him. She felt an odd mix of emotions wash over her: shock, intrigue, and even a dash of vindication. There he was, the aggressive man who had demanded a seat only moments ago, now on the receiving end of public scrutiny. The story went on, detailing how he was being investigated for diverting funds from numerous charities to line his own pockets while claiming he was helping the community. "What a charmer," someone muttered nearby, shaking their head. The statement hung in the air like a heavy fog. Mia leaned closer to the screen, her eyes searching for some hint of remorse in the man's expression. Instead, his bravado remained intact even in the face of scandal. It set off a stir of anger within her. This man had the world at his feet and couldn't even grasp the impact of his actions. An unexpected sympathy tugged at Mia's heartstrings. She remembered his earlier desperation, the way he had begged for a seat as if his entire life depended on it. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just about a man in a room. This was about someone who was now trapped by his own choices, feeling the walls close in around him. The news continued, painting a picture of a man who had it all: a commanding presence, a successful career, a reputation built on the backs of others. But the camera angles shifted, revealing protesters with signs outside his office, furious over the deceit. It was a meticulous unraveling of someone who had convinced others they were worthy of trust while living a lie. Suddenly, the man himself appeared on the screen, trying to make a statement as he left a press conference. He declared, his voice booming through the speakers. Laughter erupted in the lobby at his defiance, dark and mocking. Mia felt a knot form in her throat. How could he stand there, defiant in the face of such heavy evidence? Power and money had shielded him for so long, but in that moment she couldn't help but wonder if the world would finally see him for what he was. The lobby felt charged, pulsing with energy, the quiet buzz becoming an electric hum of conversation and speculation. People exchanged glances, brows furrowed in disbelief. Everyone was in disbelief that someone could fall so hard from grace. Mia's thoughts drifted back to moments earlier when she had stood her ground. Her mind raced as she considered the nature of power and privilege. So many might have been tempted to grant him a seat, to bow to the demand of someone with a flashy title. But standing firm had meant holding onto her principles, something many don't think to do when faced with authority. Time seemed to pass in slow motion. The news coverage shifted, focusing on the community being deceived, highlighting interviews with volunteers who shared their heartbreak, people whose trust had been betrayed. Mia felt a surge of compassion for them. They had been misled just like she'd been, if only for a few tense minutes. And then, as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, the lobby doors opened again and in he walked. The man's face was flushed, and his confident stride had been replaced by an uncertain shuffle. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Mia. He asked, the bravado drained from his voice. "Looking for my dignity, apparently," Mia replied. She couldn't hide the sharpness in her tone. The man opened his mouth to respond, but words failed him. Instead, he glanced back at the TV and saw himself plastered across the screen again, the words investigated and fraud glaring down at him like an accusation. "Listen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I come off as tough, but I didn't mean." The facade was cracking, and for the first time Mia could see the vulnerability beneath. She echoed, incredulous, "Helping yourself, maybe." The weight of her words hung heavily between them, mingling with the ambient sounds of the lobby. The air felt thick with unspoken truths, and she could see him grappling with his choices, the glimmer of defiance replaced with a flicker of self-doubt. "This isn't who I am," he insisted, the rigidity in his posture softening. "I've done good things. Tell me you've never what made mistakes." Mia's voice raised slightly with passion. His eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and shame. "I know enough," she shot back. "You demand service like you're entitled to it, but that entitlement ends at the human level." He took a step back, visibly shaken. The world outside the hotel continued to churn, the noise of city life spilling in. Mia could see the gears turning in his mind, and an ache of compassion swelled within her. He asked, almost pleading, "I think they'll want to see you try to be better." His face grew pale, a stark contrast against the brightness of the lobby lights. "I always thought money could fix everything." "Bingo," she said curtly, her heart racing. "Now you have to decide what matters, and it's not about your office or your title." The room felt smaller, the two of them standing on opposite ends of a chasm formed by choices. He shifted, glancing nervously at the TV, still broadcasting his downfall. A mention of a hearing scheduled for next week came up, sending a ripple of tension through the lobby. "You have a chance to turn this around," Mia said, her voice softening. "You can make amends if you choose to put in the work." He let her words sink in, searching her gaze for something understanding, perhaps, or hope. Finally, he took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "All right, I'll try," he said quietly. Mia watched as the intensity faded from his expression, replaced by a glimmer of determination. In that moment of surrender, something shifted not just in him, but in her as well. She had stood her ground in a moment that could have easily turned into submission, and perhaps that resolve had sparked a small change in him. As he turned to leave, Mia felt a sense of relief and clarity wash over her. She had witnessed a man begin to confront a darker part of himself, a battle that felt universal. In a world eager to point fingers and rush to conclusions, the journey of redemption was sometimes hidden beneath layers of arrogance, anger, and raw humanity. She was left standing in that bustling lobby, the chaos of city life continuing around her, but she felt anchored in that moment. The once sharp sounds faded into a gentle hum. And she knew that both she and the man had a long road ahead, each finding their way through the tangled paths of their lives. The sprawling hotel lobby was abuzz with chatter, the comforting hum of conversations mingling with the soft clinks of glasses and the faint strains of jazz music filtering through the air. Just as Sarah wiped down the polished counter, she caught sight of him entering. He walked in like he owned the place, confidence radiating from every step. A tailored suit hugged his frame, and expensive shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing like thunder in a still room. He called out, his voice booming over the gentle cacophony. Sarah barely looked up at first, her focus dividing between the handful of task lists on her desk and the bustling scene around her. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice steady. His brow furrowed in disbelief. "What do you mean fully booked?" She met his gaze, unwavering. "I assure you, sir, we have reservations for every table." He leaned over the counter, his proximity sending an unwelcome prickle down her spine. He said it like a challenge, as if his mere identity should bend the rules. "I don't need to know who you are," she replied, her tone firm. The air felt electric, charged with tension. The man stepped back, his facade cracking, and for a fleeting moment, Sarah wondered if she could catch a glimpse of something human underneath that polished exterior. But the moment passed, replaced by irritation. With a scoff, he spun on his heel and exited with all the grace of a storm. Sarah couldn't help but feel a swirl of emotions, relief mingled with a strange regret, yet she shook it off as simply doing her job. The din of the lobby surged back into focus as she returned to her duties, shelving the encounter away in her mind. But then something caught her attention. The large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered into action. The bright colors captured everyone's gaze, and the flash of a chaotic news report filled the space. Her heart seemed to stop for a moment, her focus shifting entirely to the screen. The image displayed was unmistakable. There he was, the same man who had just stormed out. The news anchor's voice droned, detailing allegations of embezzlement and betrayal. As the camera panned to the angry crowd gathered outside his corporate office, her stomach twisted into knots. Someone whispered nearby, and Sarah couldn't respond. The realization hit her. The man wasn't just a random businessman. He was a public figure, a man who had apparently been deceiving not just his associates, but the very community that supported him. Time seemed to stretch as she absorbed the unfolding drama on the news. "This is enormous," the anchor continued, describing how funds meant for local charities had vanished into thin air, making way for lavish indulgences and hidden accounts. Sarah felt a cold wave of satisfaction mixed with disbelief. She remembered his arrogant demeanor, the demanding way he had insisted on priority, the way he assumed doors would open for him simply because he existed. And yet here he was on the brink of public disgrace. As the news report rolled on, showing clips from previous press conferences where he had defended himself with bravado, Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the TV. The juxtaposition was striking. This man, nearly untouchable just hours ago, was now facing the mighty consequences of his actions. Sarah leaned against the counter, her fingers gripping it tightly. What did it take for someone to rise so high only to crumble in an instant? She felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. He hadn't just been rude to her, he'd been living a lie, pretending to hold the keys to abundance and security while operating under a thick veil of deceit. The scene shifted again, showing individuals who had once seen him as a leader. They stood, microphones in hand, voicing their anger and disbelief. Sarah couldn't help but admire their courage. They seemed fragmented yet resolute, determined to reclaim the trust that had been stolen from them. Then, just as the piece hit a crescendo, she heard the doors swing open again. To her astonishment, the same man strode back into the lobby, looking disheveled and frantic this time. His confident demeanor was utterly stripped away, his jaw clenched, eyes darting around as if seeking refuge. He asked, though the authoritative edge had dissipated. It was as if he were a child who'd just been chastised, exposed, and raw. Sarah's heart raced, caught between sympathy and indignation. "You need to leave," she said, keeping her tone steady. His gaze darkened, but it flickered with something else: fear. "You don't understand. I need to talk to someone." Suspicion brewed in Sarah's mind. Did he truly want help, or was he simply trying to spin the narrative in his favor? "I've watched the news," she said coldly. He stepped closer, desperation layering his words. "Listen, I get it, I was wrong, but right now all I have is your attention, just..." She hesitated, torn between the anger of being dismissed earlier and the instinct to listen to a person truly in despair. "Because," he said, swallowing hard, "the media only tells half the story." Reluctantly, Sarah crossed her arms, taking a moment to consider. "Fine." A flicker of hope lit his eyes as he grasped at the chance to explain himself. "I was raised in a rough neighborhood. I clawed my way to the top, trying to lift others as I climbed. But somewhere along the way, I let ambition drown my morality. I thought I was making the right decisions for the business, for the people I cared about." The rawness in his voice cut through Sarah's defenses, and for a moment she saw not just a criminal, but a man struggling with his own demons. "That doesn't excuse betrayal," she countered. "I know," he replied, tears glistening in his eyes. "I know, but the fear of losing everything, of letting down the people who counted on me, twisted my perception." She could almost hear his internal conflict, the guilt wreaking havoc on his mind. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make it right," he continued, his voice trembling. "I've started engaging with the communities I've hurt, trying to repair relationships." Sarah couldn't deny the fight within him. It was gripping and raw, pulling at her heartstrings. She took a breath, absorbing the gravity of his confession. "But you didn't just hurt them." "I see that now," he admitted, his expression earnest. "I thought power would give me security, but now it feels like a curse. I just want a chance to rebuild something real." The truth reflected in his eyes, stark and unsettling. He was painfully aware of his flaws and the web of lies he had spun. For the first time, Sarah started to wonder if there was a path beyond the chaos. Redemption wasn't just a cliché, it could very well be a reality for him. "I can't imagine what it feels like to be you right now," she said cautiously. "But the truth is, you need to own this." His nod was almost imperceptible, yet there was a kind of resolve in it. He asked with quiet sincerity. "Start by facing the people you've wronged," she replied, intensity returning to her voice. "You can't hide from this." He took a step back, absorbing her words like a sponge. There was distance in the way he carried himself, but she could see the shift beginning to take shape, an idea forming. For the first time in their conversation, he appeared hopeful, his heart wrestling with the weight of possibility. He asked, "Then you listen?" The truth was, he was already facing backlash, but this could be a pivotal moment. She could feel the gravity of the room shift. Where once there had been tension, suddenly there was possibility. The world continued outside, cars zooming past against the backdrop of a fading sunset, the colors spilling through the lobby windows like liquid fire. "You could become a voice for change," Sarah said, locking eyes with him. The possibility hung in the air like a sweet perfume, intoxicating with complexity. They were facing each other now, not just a receptionist and a businessman, but two people wrestling with their own struggles and demons. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said, falling back into the present moment. Sarah offered a small smile. "Everyone deserves to be more than their mistakes, but don't think this will be easy." "I understand," he said, a newfound strength seeping into his tone. As he turned to leave, Sarah felt an unexpected warmth spread within her. This man was a flawed individual, but he had taken the first step toward healing. Perhaps they were both breaking barriers, pushing through their own perceptions and judgments. In the vibrant lobby, amidst laughter, business deals, and the allure of the nightlife outside, Sarah looked at the news still rolling across the screen. The tale of a man marked by failure was also a story of potential rebirth. It echoed a truth that ran deep through human experience. We all hold the capacity to rise from our own ashes. With conviction in her heart, she hoped for the best for him, for the community, and perhaps even for herself. Life was rarely simple, yet in its complexity lay the beauty of transformation, and she was ready to witness it unfold before her eyes. On an ordinary Thursday evening, amid the low hum of the bustling hotel lobby, a figure swept in through the doors, drawing every eye with the intensity of his presence. Alex strode across the glossy marble floor, radiating an air of importance. He wore a sharp, tailored suit that seemed to grip his frame just a little too tightly, and his designer shoes clicked confidently against the tiles. He bellowed, his voice echoing as guests turned in curiosity. Sarah, the front desk attendant, looked up from her screen, her brow furrowed in irritation. For weeks now, the hotel had been fully booked, and tonight was no different. "I'm sorry, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. "We're fully booked this evening." His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. "This is not just about having dinner. I have important business to discuss." She straightened her shoulders, a rush of defiance surging through her. "No exceptions, sir." The room seemed to hold its breath. The polished marble beneath them gleamed under the bright overhead lights, and the laughter of guests at tables nearby faded into a dull murmur. Alex's face tightened in frustration, disbelief clouding his features. He asked, the arrogance dripping from his words like honey that had gone sour. "No," Sarah replied, her eyes boring into his. He faltered for a beat, taken aback, the mask of confidence sliding just a little. Most people would have cowered or rolled over, but Sarah stood firm, a soldier in her world, taking on whatever storm came her way. With a sharp intake of breath, he collected himself. "Fine," he huffed, spinning on his heel and storming back out, the heavy doors swinging shut with a resounding thud. As the lobby regained its rhythm, Sarah turned back to her work, taking a moment to ground herself. She had done her job, she reminded herself. No one was above the rules, not even a man who strolled in like he owned the world. That was how the powerful often operated, wrapped in their own bubble, expecting to be coddled. But as Sarah refocused on her screen, something caught her eye a flicker on the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. It sprang to life, loud enough to drown out the quiet conversations among guests, snapping her attention back to the unfolding drama. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She couldn't look away as the news anchor detailed the downfall of a seemingly untouchable leader, a name she vaguely recognized. The next moment, the screen displayed Alex's face. Panic consumed her as she realized this man she had turned away was a headline, the infamous businessman embroiled in scandal, accused of embezzling millions from local charities. "What a piece of work," someone muttered nearby. Brimming with curiosity, guests began to cluster around the TV, all eyes rapt with disbelief. Sarah's mind raced. She remembered how he had leaned over the counter, still demanding something that was not his to claim. Had he been using that very arrogance to fool those around him? Did he believe he was invincible, above the law, or had he convinced himself that this was the cost of ambition? As she absorbed the details spilling from the screen, the news anchor continued to describe how the allegations had surfaced in the past few days, revealing layers of deception that ran deeper than anyone thought. Sarah felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief mingled with discomfort watching the demise of a man who had just brashly claimed authority moments ago. "Community members are enraged," the anchor continued. Images of protesters flashed on the screen, holding signs that screamed betrayal and deceit. Sarah thought of the people out there, their trust shattered. She felt a flicker of empathy despite his earlier arrogance. Then, as if summoned by fate, the heavy lobby doors swung open once again. Alex entered, but this time he seemed a shadow of the man who had marched in before. His once elegantly tousled hair now looked disheveled, and the confidence in his stride had been replaced by uncertainty. Panic etched across his face, he made a beeline for the TV, gaping at his own image splashed across the screen. As the gravity sank in, Sarah observed the turmoil swirling within him. He was watching his life fall apart in real time, the news painting a picture of his failures that he could no longer escape. He mumbled under his breath, his voice cracking, and the bravado from earlier disappearing completely. Turning away from the chaos on the TV, he locked eyes with Sarah. "I need your help," his voice trembled, sincerity flaring where arrogance had once lived. Sarah echoed, her heart racing. "It's not what you think," he insisted, desperation lacing his words. For a moment she hesitated. This was the man who had brushed her aside, who had thought his importance could steamroll over her rights, but there was a glimmer of vulnerability in his eyes now. She found herself wanting to hear him out, even if just to understand the depth of his ego's destruction. "Fine," she said finally, crossing her arms, preparing to face him down. He took a deep breath, wrestling with his thoughts. "I didn't choose the path I'm on to hurt anyone. I wanted to rise up, to provide for my family and give back to my community." Sarah pressed, picking apart his excuse. "Compromise," he admitted, his voice thickening. "You start rationalizing decisions, thinking that a little dishonesty can create a greater good." The weight of his words settled heavily on the air between them, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. Each person carried their own burdens, she understood that, but did it ever justify betraying others? Let me guess, she said, her tone softening. A small nod confirmed her suspicion. I first felt power and influence as intoxicating. I ignored the red flags. I justified every misstep, convinced it was for a higher purpose. The sincerity in his voice struck a chord within her, and she found herself torn. She wanted to hate him for what he had done, but there was something raw in his honesty. It was the detrimental allure of success, that primal urge to push boundaries and test limits. Sarah let out a sigh, watching the news report fade into murmurs and whispers around the room. And now, what do you plan to do? Running won't fix it, he replied, his voice filled with resignation. I need to face them, admit my failures, but where do I even begin? She leaned closer, her voice steady. You have to show them you're willing to make amends. Actions speak louder than words. He glanced back at the screen where images of community protests flickered, shouts for accountability echoing through the lobby. I can't face them alone. Then don't face them alone. Find people who believed in you before. Alex looked thoughtful, the heat of anger giving way to introspection. Sarah nodded. People remember the power of change. Everyone stumbles, but it's how you rise that defines you. As if realizing for the first time the potential impact of his actions, he stood a little taller. You're right. Before he could turn to leave, Sarah added, there's one more thing you need to remember. This journey won't just be about making things right, it's about facing yourself too. You'll have to confront your demons, let them take their course. You'll be vulnerable, and that's frightening. He nodded, absorbing her words. Thank you for listening. As he stepped toward the exit, she felt an unexpected weight lifting. In that moment, they were not just a man and a woman separated by circumstance, but two people grappling with the shadows of their identities. The world outside pulsed with life, frozen in inertia, while Alex took his first step into the unknown. Sarah watched as he became a shape against the backdrop of the city, a silhouette against the glow of streetlights, carrying the weight of redemption on his shoulders. It was in that quiet space, with the hotel's gentle hum enveloping her, that she realized the truth. To endure was just as significant as to thrive. Life was a tumultuous journey, fraught with mistakes and choices, but in understanding and confronting them, each person held the power to rise anew. As the night deepened around her, filled with possibility and uncertainty, Sarah returned to her desk. On an ordinary Thursday evening, amid the low hum of the bustling hotel lobby, a figure swept in through the doors, drawing every eye with the intensity of his presence. Alex strode across the glossy marble floor, radiating an air of importance. He wore a sharp, tailored suit that seemed to grip his frame just a little too tightly, and his designer shoes clicked confidently against the tiles. He bellowed, his voice echoing as guests turned in curiosity. Sarah, the front desk attendant, looked up from her screen, her brow furrowed in irritation. For weeks now, the hotel had been fully booked, and tonight was no different. I'm sorry, sir, she replied, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. We're fully booked this evening. His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. This is not just about having dinner. I have important business to discuss. She straightened her shoulders, a rush of defiance surging through her. No exceptions, sir. The room seemed to hold its breath. The polished marble beneath them gleamed under the bright overhead lights, and the laughter of guests at tables nearby faded into a dull murmur. Alex's face tightened in frustration, disbelief clouding his features. He asked, the arrogance dripping from his words like honey that had gone sour. No, Sarah replied, her eyes boring into his. He faltered for a beat, taken aback, the mask of confidence sliding just a little. Most people would have cowered or rolled over, but Sarah stood firm, a soldier in her world, taking on whatever storm came her way. With a sharp intake of breath, he collected himself. Fine, he huffed, spinning on his heel and storming back out, the heavy doors swinging shut with a resounding thud. As the lobby regained its rhythm, Sarah turned back to her work, taking a moment to ground herself. She had done her job, she reminded herself. No one was above the rules, not even a man who strolled in like he owned the world. That was how the powerful often operated, wrapped in their own bubble, expecting to be coddled. But as Sarah refocused on her screen, something caught her eye a flicker on the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. It sprang to life, loud enough to drown out the quiet conversations among guests, snapping her attention back to the unfolding drama. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She couldn't look away as the news anchor detailed the downfall of a seemingly untouchable leader, a name she vaguely recognized. The next moment, the screen displayed Alex's face. Panic consumed her as she realized this man she had turned away was a headline, the infamous businessman embroiled in scandal, accused of embezzling millions from local charities. What a piece of work, someone muttered nearby. Brimming with curiosity, guests began to cluster around the TV, all eyes rapt with disbelief. Sarah's mind raced. She remembered how he had leaned over the counter, still demanding something that was not his to claim. Had he been using that very arrogance to fool those around him? Did he believe he was invincible, above the law? Or had he convinced himself that this was the cost of ambition? As she absorbed the details spilling from the screen, the news anchor continued to describe how the allegations had surfaced in the past few days. revealing layers of deception that ran deeper than anyone thought. Sarah felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief mingled with discomfort watching the demise of a man who had just brashly claimed authority moments ago. Community members are enraged, the anchor continued. Images of protesters flashed on the screen, holding signs that screamed betrayal and deceit. Sarah thought of the people out there, their trust shattered. She felt a flicker of empathy despite his earlier arrogance. Then, just as the piece hit a crescendo, she heard the doors swing open again. To her astonishment, Alex entered, but this time he seemed a shadow of the man who had marched in before. His once elegantly tousled hair now looked disheveled, and the confidence in his stride had been replaced by uncertainty. Panic etched across his face, he made a beeline for the TV, gaping at his own image splashed across the screen. As the gravity sank in, Sarah observed the turmoil swirling within him. He was watching his life fall apart in real time, the news painting a picture of his failures that he could no longer escape. He mumbled under his breath, his voice cracking and the bravado from earlier disappearing completely. Turning away from the chaos on the TV, he locked eyes with Sarah. "I need your help," his voice trembled, sincerity flaring where arrogance had once lived. Sarah echoed, her heart racing. "It's not what you think," he insisted, desperation lacing his words. For a moment, she hesitated. This was the man who had brushed her aside, who had thought his importance could steamroll over her rights. But there was a glimmer of vulnerability in his eyes now. She found herself wanting to hear him out, even if just to understand the depth of his ego's destruction. "Fine," she said finally, crossing her arms, preparing to face him down. He took a deep breath, wrestling with his thoughts. "I didn't choose the path I'm on to hurt anyone. I wanted to rise up, to provide for my family and give back to my community." Sarah pressed, picking apart his excuse. "Compromise," he admitted, his voice thickening. "You start rationalizing decisions, thinking that a little dishonesty can create a greater good." The weight of his words settled heavily on the air between them, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. Each person carried their own burdens, she understood that, but did it ever justify betraying others? Sarah let out a sigh, watching the news report fade into murmurs and whispers around the room. "And now, what do you plan to do?" "Running won't fix it," he replied, his voice filled with resignation. "I need to face them, admit my failures, but where do I even begin?" She leaned closer, her voice steady. "You have to show them you're willing to make amends. Actions speak louder than words." He glanced back at the screen where images of community protests flickered, shouts for accountability echoing through the lobby. "I can't face them alone." "Then don't face them alone. Find people who believed in you before." Alex looked thoughtful, the heat of anger giving way to introspection. Sarah nodded. "People remember the power of change. Everyone stumbles, but it's how you rise that defines you." As if realizing for the first time the potential impact of his actions, he stood a little taller. "You're right." Before he could turn to leave, Sarah added, "There's one more thing you need to remember. This journey won't just be about making things right, it's about facing yourself too. You'll have to confront your demons, let them take their course. You'll be vulnerable, and that's frightening." He nodded, absorbing her words. "Thank you for listening." As he stepped toward the exit, she felt an unexpected weight lifting. In that moment, they were not just a man and a woman separated by circumstance, but two people grappling with the shadows of their identities. The world outside pulsed with life, frozen in inertia while Alex took his first step into the unknown. Sarah watched as he became a shape against the backdrop of the city, a silhouette against the glow of streetlights, carrying the weight of redemption on his shoulders. It was in that quiet space, with the hotel's gentle hum enveloping her, that she realized the truth. To endure was just as significant as to thrive. Life was a tumultuous journey, fraught with mistakes and choices, but in understanding and confronting them, each person held the power to rise anew. As the night deepened around her, filled with possibility and uncertainty, Sarah returned to her desk. There was still work to do, but she felt a lingering warmth within, as if she had glimpsed the transformative power of the human spirit. A simple yet powerful reminder that every ending can hold a new beginning. The lobby shone with polished marble and twinkling lights, a testament to the hotel's opulence. The soft murmurs of guests and the clinking of glasses created a warm atmosphere, the kind that wrapped around you like a favorite blanket. But all of that changed in an instant when the door swung open and in he walked. Jake strutted in like a storm, a whirlwind of arrogance and confidence wrapped in a tailored suit. His shoes clicked against the floor, sparking uneasy glances from the guests. He boomed, causing heads to turn. "I need a table for dinner." Samantha, the receptionist, looked at him, her brow arching. She had been working double shifts this week, and the last thing she wanted was to deal with another demanding guest. He raised an eyebrow, disbelief dancing in his eyes. "You have to be kidding." With a confident steadiness, she replied, "No, sir, and I really don't care. We follow a strict policy here." For a heartbeat, the air crackled between them. His bravado wavered for a moment, and she could see the anger rising in his chest like steam building in a pressure cooker. "This is unacceptable." "Well, tonight you'll have to learn," Samantha shot back, keeping her tone level. He scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief as he turned on his heel, leaving with a forceful push against the door that echoed through the lobby like thunder. As the heavy door swung shut behind him, the atmosphere shifted back to its usual calm, but Samantha felt a tension linger in the air. She returned to her desk, trying to shake off the encounter. After all, it wasn't the first rude guest she'd dealt with, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. But just as she refocused on the piles of paperwork in front of her, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, cutting through the chatter in the lobby. The vivid colors captured her attention, pulling her eyes toward the screen. Samantha felt her heart race, an unsettling feeling creeping through her. The news could affect anyone a sign of the times, she thought, but then the announcer's voice called out a name, and it hit her like a freight train. Jake. Her breath caught in her throat as the familiar face appeared, looking just as cocky as before, but with an unsettling twist. There was a shadow hanging over him now. The anchor detailed the accusations, embezzlement, betrayal, and a community reeling from the fallout. Images of disgruntled citizens holding signs filled the screen, their faces taut with outrage. They were protesting against someone who had once been their golden boy, someone they believed in. She whispered to herself, the pieces suddenly clicking into place. It wasn't just about a man demanding service, it was about a man wielding power he thought he could misuse. Guests began to gather around the screen, their murmurs rising to a confused buzz. A woman exclaimed. Samantha felt a rush of indignation and a twinge of satisfaction. Perhaps his arrogance would finally be laid bare for everyone to see. She had seen it before, the way people with power often believed themselves above the rules. Not today. Minutes felt like hours as the news continued, detailing every misstep, every lie unraveled. The anchor detailed how Jake had diverted funds from charities meant to support the community, insisting that he never intended to betray anyone. But at that moment, his image transformed from a front-page success story into a cautionary tale, painted in shades of greed and deceit. But then the door swung open again, and in he walked. This time, the air felt different, heavy with uncertainty. Jake's suit hung just a bit looser, his swagger replaced with a shaky resolve. He scanned the lobby, his eyes landing on the TV just as the words investigation and fraud flickered across the screen. Samantha felt her heart race again, this time not with indignation but with something more complex, curiosity and unease tangled together. He mumbled to himself, disbelief crashing over him as he realized the magnitude of his downfall. Jake shuffled closer to the screen, his face pale. The bravado was gone, replaced by an overwhelming vulnerability. As if pulled by an invisible force, he turned to Samantha. "I need your help," he said, his voice trembling. She echoed, incredulity filling her. "I know how I acted," he said, frustration and desperation mingling in his tone. "I was wrong." She stared at him, weighing her options. For all his earlier arrogance, the man before her now seemed lost, like a child who had strayed far from home. "You have 1 minute," she said, arms crossed tightly, preparing for the defense he wouldn't dare play. He took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts as his eyes darted back to the TV. "I didn't mean any of this, at least not how it sounds. I started with good intentions. I wanted to make something of myself, to give back to my family and community. And that's supposed to excuse what?" "Embezzling funds," Samantha's words cut like knives. He winced but pressed on. "Compromise begins subtly. You think you're doing right, but you cross a line, then you justify each new mistake, tell yourself it's okay because the end justifies the means." As he spoke, Samantha could see the shame in his eyes, loss evident in his posture. She felt a flicker of empathy slip into her hardened heart. "So what now?" "No," he replied, the weight of his words palpable. "I realize I can't simply apologize. I need to demonstrate that I can change, that I can be better. Facing those you've wronged is the first step," she said, her tone becoming softer. "But you'll need to show them through action, not just words." Jake's face pinched with worry. "Then you listen, you allow them to express their anger and hurt," she replied. He asked, a tremor in his voice. "Facing the truth is scary," she said, a wave of compassion sweeping over her. "But it's necessary. You must confront not only those you've wronged, but also your own reflection." He nodded slowly, the gears of realization turning. "Yes," Sarah replied, a determined fire igniting within her. "True power lies in humility. It's in acknowledging failures and working to rebuild what's been broken." He looked at her, vulnerability giving way to something deeper, a flicker of hope. "You're right." As he turned to leave, Samantha felt her heart swell, a transformation in the air between them. This wasn't just a moment of realization for Jake, it was a pivotal point in both their lives. She watched as he stepped out into the night, shoulders squared, ready to face the storm brewing outside. In the lobby, the quieter sounds of laughter and conversations resumed, but Sarah remained rooted in her spot, absorbing the moment. She had been witness to something profound, a glimpse into the heart of another person, a reminder that everyone was capable of change. As the news report faded into the background, it felt as though time had paused. Jake had left behind more than just the shell of a successful businessman. He had collected the threads of his humanity and taken a step toward redemption. It was that singular moment in time, a convergence of two paths colliding, and it reverberated through her very bones. In a world where so many were caught up in the madness of ambition, it was easy to forget the cost of that climb. As she resumed her work, surrounded by the soft chatter of the lobby, she felt a new sense of purpose settle within her. Perhaps everyone had their battles to face, after all, and perhaps hers would be in helping those around her instead of simply enforcing rules. In that realization, Sarah found strength, not just in standing firm against arrogance, but in demonstrating compassion for those who needed it most. Life may be chaotic and unyielding, but within that chaos lay the possibilities for healing, for change, for connection. Jake's journey was just beginning, but the spark of hope he had found was contagious. And as Sarah continued her work, the world around her pulsed with a new vibrancy. It was never too late to fight for what truly mattered, and in that fight, vulnerability could become a source of strength. The night stretched ahead, full of potential, and she was ready to meet it head-on. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses filled the luxurious hotel lobby, echoing the chatter of guests dressed to the nines, their vibrant energy reverberating against the gleaming marble floors. As Lucy stood behind the reception desk, she felt that familiar, buzz-excited conversation mixing with the clatter of plates being cleared and wine being poured. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The revolving doors swung open with a thud, and in walked a man dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that screamed privilege. He strode across the room like he owned the place, his shoes clicking loudly against the floor, slicing through the ambient noise. There was a commanding presence about him, an air that demanded attention. He demanded, his voice cutting through the vibrant energy in the room. Lucy looked up, momentarily taken aback by the forcefulness in his tone. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked for dinner tonight," she replied calmly, her heartbeat steady despite the palpable tension that started to fill the air. He narrowed his eyes, disbelief simmering just beneath the surface. "I don't think you understand, I don't do waiting." The way he leaned on the counter, his arrogance rippling through the air, made Lucy's skin crawl. She stood firm, shaking her head slightly. "I understand what you're saying, but it won't change the fact that we're at capacity. I cannot seat you tonight." His expression darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. He snapped, incredulity and entitlement radiating from him. "No, sir, and it really doesn't matter," she replied coolly, aware that the tension in the lobby was rising, with nearby guests glancing over, some pretending to be engrossed in their conversations, others leaning closer, intrigued. He scoffed, taking a step back as if her words had struck him. "You'll regret this." "I'll make sure you do," he muttered before turning to storm out, the door slamming shut behind him. Lucy watched him leave, a mix of relief and irritation washing over her. She had dealt with demanding customers before, but something about this man rubbed her the wrong way. It was typical of someone used to getting their way with little regard for others. She shook her head, pushing thoughts of him aside to focus on the guests still waiting for service. But just as she began to settle back into her routine, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, cutting through the lobby's ambience. The vibrant colors and increasing volume drew everyone's attention, and Lucy paused, turning toward the screen. Lucy's heart raced as the name rolled off the anchor's tongue. It was the same man, Jake, that entitled jerk who had just stormed out minutes ago. A rush of disbelief coursed through her. The screen switched to a montage of his public life, showing clips of glitzy fundraisers where he smiled and posed with community leaders. The anchor continued, detailing how he was under fire for diverting funds from local charities. Lucy's stomach twisted. The news anchor spoke of angry protests outside his corporate office, of everyday citizens reeling from betrayal. She whispered to herself, a sense of vindication igniting within her. People began gathering around the TV, and gasps of shock filled the air. Someone exclaimed, pointing as disbelief and excitement rippled through the crowd. As the anchor detailed new allegations surfacing fraud, deceit, a web of money trails that led to shattered trust, Lucy felt a strange mix of emotions. Here was a man who walked in, demanding respect while pioneering a scheme that could cripple the very community he claimed to support. It couldn't have been more fitting. Then, just as the report hit its peak, the revolving doors swung open again. Everyone turned to see Jake step back inside. This time he seemed a mere shadow of the man who had left moments ago. His posture was slumped, doubt had replaced his earlier bravado. He stared at the screen, watching as his life unraveled in front of him. "What?" he mumbled, disbelief coloring his voice. Lucy could barely register the panic in his eyes. The cocky, self-important man had vanished, leaving a disheveled figure grappling with his collapse. She felt a strange twinge in her chest, something raw and unexpected. Before she could overthink it, he turned toward her, desperation etched on his face. I need your help," he said, each word tumbling out like a pebble in a stream, sinking into the gravity of the moment. She echoed, grappling with her own mixed emotions. "Why should I help you? I know I was wrong," Jake said, his voice trembling now. "But I'm in over my head." Lucy hesitated but saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the crack in his demeanor. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay, you have 1 minute." He took a deep breath, visibly gathering himself. "I got caught up in this life, this idea of success. I thought I was doing it all right, you know. I wanted to help my family, my community, but I let ambition cloud my judgment. Now, The sincerity in his voice pulled at something inside her. It reminded her of how easy it was to get lost in the pursuit of success, to understand the allure of power, how it could twist anyone's perception of right and wrong. Lucy asked, firm but curious. It means I didn't realize until now how much I've hurt people, real people. I thought I was invulnerable, but here I am. I made the wrong choices and now I need to face them, but I need help doing that, he said, stepping closer, his voice pleading. She pushed gently. Jake's eyes hardened. I've been running from the truth for too long. I thought I could manage everything without anyone finding out. She pressed, her curiosity mingling with concern. Now I need to confront those I've wronged, he confessed, each word an admission of his failures. I can't keep hiding, she asked, both skeptical and intrigued. I don't know, he admitted, his voice starting to crack under the weight of his recognition. But I'll start by publicly acknowledging what I've done. I want to repair the damage, please, if there's any way you could. Just because you're having a moment of clarity doesn't mean I owe you anything, she interrupted sharply, feeling her resolve tight. I don't want you to forgive me, he replied, surprising her. I don't deserve it, but I need help figuring out how to do this. Lucy felt the air shift again, the tension both profound and unsettling. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the raw determination mixed with fear. It was the kind of transformation she'd read about but rarely witnessed. If you're truly serious about this, then you have to be prepared for a fight, she warned. You'll face anger, resentment, people who feel betrayed. I don't have a choice. I've done the worst I can do, and now I have to rise from this, he declared, voice steadying. I can't promise you anything, she said, her heart racing. But if you're willing to confront the people you've hurt, then maybe you'll find the way to redeem yourself. He nodded, determination glimmering in his eyes. Before he turned to leave once again, Lucy felt a rush of emotion. For all his pride and privilege, here was a man grappling with the result of his choices. Remember, Jake, you can't just disappear after that. I will, he assured her, and for the first time he seemed sincere. As he stepped into the night, Lucy felt a weight lift from her own heart. She had stood her ground against the arrogance he had portrayed just hours ago, but within that confrontation had sprung the possibility of growth. In the hotel's lobby, the murmurs of disbelief over the news report faded back to the background, but Lucy felt her heart beat with renewed purpose. It was a unique moment, a human story unfolding before her eyes. No one was simply a stereotype. Everyone held the potential for redemption if they could only navigate their own storm. Jake had left the lobby as a different man, one willing to confront his own demons head-on. And she found that the confrontation had changed her, too, igniting a spark that told her she was capable of more than she had previously known. That night the world buzzed on outside, life pulsed with a rhythm of its own. As she locked up and prepared to head home, she found herself intrigued by the unknown paths that awaited both her and Jake. Sometimes, in the darkest moments, people could find the light they were searching for. It was a reminder that every encounter held a story, one of struggle, of growth, and ultimately of the endless possibilities of change. Lucy stepped out of the hotel into the cool evening air, ready to face whatever came next. The lobby of the Grand Hotel was alive with the soft chorus of laughter and conversation, punctuated by the gentle clinking of glasses. Brightly colored lights twinkled from chandeliers above, casting a golden glow over polished marble floors. It was a typical Friday night, and for Mia, the receptionist, the hum of activity felt comforting. She moved through her routines with ease, smiling at guests, checking in arrivals, and managing the flow of people. Then suddenly the atmosphere shifted. The revolving doors burst open, and in walked a man, his entrance commanding attention. He was dressed in a suit that fit him perfectly, expensive shoes tapping out a rhythm that echoed through the lobby. Mia glanced up, noting the strong lines of his jaw and the confidence in his stride. He called out, his voice slicing through the ambient noise. Mia barely looked up from her computer. He retorted, leaning over the reception desk with a haughty expression. Mia met his gaze, unflinching. I don't need to know who you are to enforce our policy. He narrowed his eyes, irritation flickering across his features. Find me a seat, sir. I'm afraid I cannot, she replied steadily. I've told you we're booked. He opened his mouth to protest, but the sharpness of her tone had caught him off guard. In that moment, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a mask of indignation. With an exaggerated huff, he straightened up and stormed out, the door swinging shut behind him with an unsatisfying thud. As Mia turned back to her work, the tension he had left hanging dissipated, but she couldn't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction lingering in the air. She had dealt with plenty of demanding guests, but he had been especially grating. Just then, the large screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, breaking through the echoes of the lobby. Bright colors and flashing images drew her attention. Mia's heart raced. She leaned in closer, her breath catching in her throat as the news anchor's voice rang out. The camera panned to a crowd of protesters holding signs, their faces twisted in anger. Her stomach twisted as she realized the man she had just turned away was now the subject of a scandal that threatened to unravel everything he had built. The anchor detailed accusations of embezzlement surrounding funds meant for local charities, highlighting the urgency of the situation. A nearby guest muttered, echoing the disbelief of many. The people in the lobby started congregating around the screen in undulating waves. Mia's thoughts raced. What had he done? Had his arrogance led to the downfall of lives he had falsely championed? She couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had strutted in here expecting preferential treatment while running a scheme that could devastate those who had trusted him. Images of angry citizens flashed across the screen, triumphant with shouts of betrayal. They were hurling accusations, demanding accountability from a man who had just minutes ago been an untouchable figure, looming large. But even as satisfaction sparked within her, something else flickered, a twinge of compassion. What could it feel like to be at the height of one's career, only to have it all come crashing down in a matter of moments? Then, unexpectedly, the heavy doors swung open again. Jake stepped through, his face pale, almost ashen. His usual confidence had been wiped away, leaving behind a man marked by panic and uncertainty. The previous arrogance was nowhere to be found. He made a beeline for the TV, his eyes widening as he took in the breaking news that had painted him as a villain. He muttered, disbelief etched across his features. Mia took in the sight of him. There he stood, trapped by the very choices he had made, the quality of his decisions unraveling before his eyes. Yet amid chaos, the moment felt raw and striking, unveiling a person she hadn't seen moments before. Jake, I didn't know, he stammered as he grappled with what lay before him, bewildered by the unfolding repercussions. Mia stepped forward hesitantly, searching his eyes for some sign of understanding. He resembled a storm, wild, tumultuous, and chaotic. I need to talk to you, he said, desperation lacing his tone. Her chest tightened, a mixture of surprise and unease flooding her. I'm pleading with you, he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what to do. Mia considered him, feeling the weight of his request bear down on her. She could see a flicker of vulnerability beneath the layers of bravado. Help, he nodded, visible fear clouding his eyes. Mia crossed her arms, taking a stand against the chaos enveloping him. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, he confessed, his bravado fading further. Mia took a long look at him. Here was a man who had scaled heights she could only dream of, attended glamorous events, shared a stage with dignitaries, and yet he stood before her, stripped of his facade, grasping for help. That was something she couldn't ignore. She asked, her voice softer. He swallowed hard, nodding slowly as the weight of her words sank in. I know that, I need to do more, she pressed gently. I'll go directly to the communities I've harmed, he declared, a spark igniting behind his eyes. I'll confess. Okay, she replied, but it won't be easy. You have to prepare yourself for the backlash. I'm prepared, he said, his voice steadying. It'll be hard to face it, but I need to accept the consequences. For a fleeting moment, she saw a man transforming in real time, confronting the wreckage he had created. Maybe he was right, everyone made mistakes, but that didn't mean they couldn't take steps to change, to heal. Find the people you've wronged and start there, Mia advised, feeling a direct sense of purpose in her words. And remember, you don't get to decide how they react. He nodded again, the weight of determination settling around his shoulders. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with sincerity. As he turned to leave once more, Mia felt an undeniable shift in the era transformation that had surged through their brief conversation. There was something more than just forgiveness brewing here. Jake was about to step into the unknown, and in that fear lay the potential for growth. The chaos of the hotel lobby continued around them as people returned their focus to the news. But here, the moment felt frozen in time, a pivotal juncture where two lives intertwined, if only briefly. Jake had walked in as a man draped in arrogance, but was leaving with the first flickers of humility. For Mia, that mattered. She watched as he stepped back out, disappearing into a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Maybe this was the beginning of an ascension, not just for him, but for herself too. Sometimes, in confronting one's darkest moments, clarity could emerge. She realized that in battling the arrogance of others, she had discovered compassion. It was a powerful lesson, one that reminded her that everyone had a story. As the evening drew on, Mia found herself reflecting on the weight of that transformative exchange. Life would keep turning, and people would continue to rise and fall. Yet there was beauty and strength in the possibility of redemption. She returned to her routines with newfound energy, ready to tackle whatever would come next. Jake's journey had just begun, but she felt hopeful. Both of them had embarked on paths that would change their lives forever. The night pulsed on, dulling the sounds around her as she began to understand the complex layers of humanity, of connection, of forgiveness. As she settled into her shift, she knew that sometimes it took a wake-up call for someone to truly see their reflection, and in that mirror lay the opportunity to rise anew. The hotel lobby buzzed with energy, a mosaic of laughter and clinking glass, shimmering under the golden lights of extravagant chandeliers. It was a Friday evening, and guests in elegant attire milled about, their joyful chatter creating a delightful backdrop. Mia stood behind the reception desk, a steady presence amidst the whirlwind, her fingers gliding over the keyboard as she checked in guests with practiced ease. Just as she glanced at the clock 7:30, there was a shift in the air. The heavy glass doors swung open, and in walked a man whose very presence seemed to command attention. He wore a tailored suit that hugged his broad shoulders, his polished shoes tapping sharply against the pristine marble floor. The confidence radiating from him drew curious glances and whispered conversations. "I need a table for dinner," he bellowed, striding to the front desk with an arrogance that made Mia's stomach twist. She met his gaze, feeling the weight of expectation in the air. "I'm sorry, sir," she replied, her voice steady. He leaned over the counter, heavy with entitlement. His tone was dense, as if assuming that mere recognition would bend the rules in his favor. "I don't need to know who you are to follow our policy. I can't seat you." His brow furrowed with disbelief, moving from annoyance to disdain in a heartbeat. "This is unacceptable." Mia stood firm, an unyielding edge coming into her voice. "Sir, we don't have any available tables." For a split second, Mia saw confusion swirl in his eyes, then anger settled back into place. "You'll regret this," he muttered, spinning on his heel and storming out of the lobby, the door slamming shut behind him with a force that reverberated through the room. In the aftermath, Mia felt a flicker of frustration mingled with a sense of relief. She returned to her duties as the chatter resumed, yet she couldn't help but wonder what kind of man he was, so used to getting his way that he would demand, shout, and threaten without a second thought. She shook it off, refocusing her energy on checking in the next guest. Just then, the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall flickered to life, slicing through the vibrant atmosphere like a knife. The bright colors of breaking news flooded the lobby, pulling everyone's gaze toward the screen. Her breath caught in her throat, the camera shifted, showing the man who had just left, his image flashing across the screen. The crowd gasped collectively, murmurs of disbelief beginning to circulate. Yes, it was him. Jake Anderson, a name that had been synonymous with success and philanthropy, now crumbling under the weight of scandal. Local businessman Jake Anderson is facing serious allegations, accused of embezzling funds intended for local charities, the news anchor reported, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Mia felt a rush of conflicting emotions wash over her. She had stood her ground against him just moments ago, and now he was being torn apart on live television. The feeling of vindication was strong. He had come in here demanding respect, yet now the world was turning against him. The entire lobby shifted into a frenzy as people gathered around the screen in disbelief, glued to the unfolding drama. A nearby guest murmured. Mia's mind raced. How could someone who seemed so untouchable be unraveled so quickly? The weight of his earlier arrogance felt suddenly misplaced. Where had it gotten him? It made her think of the fragility of pride, how easily one could be brought low by the very choices they had made. Suddenly, the heavy door swung open again. Jake stepped back in, looking less like the commanding figure he had moments ago and more like a man stripped bare. His hair was disheveled, and the confidence in his stride had fallen away, leaving a shadow of despair in its place. Panic swept over his face when he realized everyone was staring at him, eyes still glued to the screen. He said, his voice barely above a whisper, confusion etched into every line on his face. Mia felt a sense of detachment as she watched the man who had demanded her attention now come undone. He glanced at the TV, and horror washed over him as the news anchor continued to relay the unfolding saga of his downfall. Her coworker, Jenny, whispered beside her, horrified yet fascinated. Jake's eyes widened as the anchor spoke about the communities he had betrayed, families left standing in the wake of stolen trust and shattered dreams. A wave of shame shattered the remnants of his arrogant demeanor, leaving a man stripped of his pretense. "This can't be happening," he mumbled, trembling. Mia stepped forward, feeling an unexpected pull to engage. "It looks like it is," she said, allowing her voice to take on a sharp edge. His gaze snapped up to meet hers, a flicker of realization mingling with fear. "I never meant for it to go this far," he confessed, vulnerability piercing through his tough exterior. "And yet here we are," she replied. He paused, his eyes darting around the room as though seeking an escape. I need to make amends," he stammered. She challenged. "Apologies won't fix this." "I understand that now," he said, his voice shaky yet resolute. "I can't keep running." Suddenly, the weight of those words hung heavily between them. Mia felt a twinge of empathy but also skepticism. Would he truly follow through? Facing off against people who had believed in him, who had put their trust in his supposed charisma and competence, was no small feat. Mia asked, still holding her ground. "Because I'm not running anymore," he said, defiance flickering in his eyes. "I'll face them all." Examined his face, searching for any sign of deceit or continued arrogance, but all she saw was fear, a vulnerability hiding behind layers of regret. "I know," he replied, voice laced with steel. "I know it won't be easy, but I have to try." His admission sent a chill through her. She challenged, watching him closely. "Then I'll listen," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'll hear every accusation, whether I deserve it or not." For a moment, Mia felt a flicker of hope spark within her. Maybe he was finally realizing the stakes, the mess he had made. Yet doubt lingered. Could a man so steeped in privilege truly comprehend the pain he had caused? Determined to hold him accountable, she nodded slowly. "If you're serious about this, you better mean it. You need to show them you are committed to making things right." Jake hesitated, weighing her words. Start with honesty, she advised, the weight of sincerity carried in her tone. Reach out to those you've let down, acknowledge your mistakes. He drew in a deep breath, steeling himself. I will. As the energy shifted around them, Mia could see the determination growing within him, yet something still gnawed at her as she watched him. His eyes gleamed with understanding. I know, this is just the beginning. With a final nod, Jake turned to leave the lobby. As he stepped back into the world, Mia felt the weight of the moment hang heavy in the air. Here was a man on the precipice of change, determined to confront his past while the storm still swirled around him. But as he stepped out, the door swung shut and the silence in the lobby filled with tension. Suddenly, the TV flickered, capturing everyone's attention once again. The anchor's voice rose in urgency, reporting that protests were escalating outside. Citizens demand justice for the betrayal they've endured. Mia felt a pit in her stomach. Moments ago, Jake was resolute, but now the thought of accountability hung in the air like a dark cloud. Would he truly have the strength to return? As the lobby buzzed with speculation and whispered questions, she glanced back at the door he had just left through. Would he find the courage to confront the fallout he had created? Or was this simply an illusion, a moment that would fade as soon as reality kicked back in? The future loomed uncertain, and the question echoed in her mind as she resumed her duties. Would Jake Anderson rise up from the ashes of his own making, or would he fade away, just another cautionary tale buried beneath headlines and broken trust? The weight of potential change cracked open a new chapter. Would he take the leap or let fear drown him once again? And with that, Mia felt a chilling realization settle in. The true test was yet to come.